Where we have a tour is Cisco Lopez. He's a second-generation cannabis farmer. He's here to talk to us about using sustainable organic methods to minimize the environmental impact of cannabis cultivation. The title of his talk is Demonstrating Watershed Protection for Cannabis Cultivation. Let's change the energy and warm up the lectern with a round of applause for Cisco Lopez. And one last reminder, we will have a question and answer session right after this presentation. So the folks on your right are collecting, this is the last round, and Chris Berry in the back. So there are boxes, we're collecting your questions. Please share them.
Afternoon, everybody. On behalf of my industry, I'd like to apologize to Rich and Michelle. I don't think I'm part of the problem, but I certainly know of people who are. I'm second generation. My father started growing cannabis before I was born. You could call them hippies, but people then correctly say, no, we were beatniks. I then decided to run away and become respectable, go to college, get a degree, work in Silicon Valley, and then I married an agricultural engineer. And she got to talking with my father, and things started becoming legal. And when the two of them put their heads together, suddenly I wind up having to build things. Moved up here to Santa Cruz to get back to the roots a little bit, and we grow on our property. And it's a beautiful place. I love living here. It reminds me of where I grew up in Montana a little bit, out in the woods. We're completely off grid. I have a large solar array. It produces about 1,500 watts of power in the summer at peak. During the course of the day, I get about 8 kilowatt hours of power, fully permitted. The only thing I'm connected to is the internet. So why do you grow outdoors? Well, the biggest reason is you can't grow organic indoor product. If you try and grow indoors organic, you will get bugs, and then you'll have to spray for them, and you cannot kill bugs indoors without heavy pesticide use because they love living indoors. There's no predators or anything else for them there. If you try and grow clean room style, you can't use soil, you have to grow hydroponic, and at that point you have to use chemical fertilizers on your product, and that is not organic either. So if you want to grow organic, you've got to grow outdoors, period. And outdoors actually, if done properly, is a much less environmental impact. People always talk about, if we just made everybody grow in greenhouses and warehouses, it would solve these problems. But the reality is, growing a pound of marijuana indoors takes about 1,500 kilowatt hours of electricity. That's a pretty big environmental impact right there. They don't use organic products that are renewable. They're creating a lot of waste like rock wool, excess water discharge. There's the people complaining about like odor pollution, for example, are generally people that are living or working close to indoor operations because those are located near other people. So outdoors lets us solve all these problems. I grow two ways outdoors. We grow directly in the ground. We dig a large hole. This hole is about 2 cubic yards of material. That plant is currently right there about 6 feet tall. We don't aim to get them much taller than that because they become a pain to work on. And actually, the current county ordinance is getting rid of the 99 plant limit, which is a wonderful thing for environmental impact because I can grow more plants that are smaller, and that means I don't have to try so hard to make the plant big, which means, for example, last year this time, I would have already started growing my plants because I need them to be as big as possible because I can only have 99 of them. This year, I'm not starting for another 2 weeks. And that means that I don't have to worry about like starting them in somebody's garage, using lights and so on, and doing an environmental impact. I can literally plant seeds directly in the ground this year. We also grow some raised beds. I grow raised beds for 2 reasons. These ones you're looking at here are raised beds because my septic system is actually right under there and I don't want it in holes. But the reason they're in these bags is because the county keeps changing what the rules are going to be every year. And rather than build permanent raised beds, these are the temporary solution. The bags actually work very well because they are air permeable, and so when roots reach the edges of the bags, they do not become root bound. which is actually much better for the plants. The drawback, however, is that in addition to being air permeable, they are very water permeable, which becomes an issue with water leaching, and we'll get to that fairly later on. So, okay, I didn't remember it going, I think we got cropped a little bit. Anyway, what do we put in our soil? Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus are the three big foods all gardeners know that soil that the plants need to grow. And there are natural sources for all of these. We use horse manure for nitrogen only mostly initially when we're establishing soil. When we are building a new garden, we will literally make it 50% horse manure as a big establishing sort of bulk material. Later on, we use much less chicken manure. It's about a square foot bag of chicken manure per plant is a sufficient nitrogen source for a year. We use fireplace ash. My house is heated with wood fire. Over the course of the winter, we burn firewood, we save all the ash, we sprinkle that around our plants, that's all we need. Bone meal, which is a byproduct of meat processing, we do actually buy. You don't need very much of it. Plants go through phosphorus fairly slowly. And then we add soil amendments mostly to keep the soil loose, help it retain water, and give microorganisms sort of safe environments. So these are not direct nutrient sources for the plants, but they are supplemental materials. And then kelp meal, literally we will use half a 50-pound bag over the entire garden over the course of the year. Just some trace elements like magnesium and things like that. And so this is actually the shortcut version, down to earth. It makes a great all-natural fertilizer, which contains pretty much all those things on that page I listed before. So whenever someone says, oh, I want to grow 6 plants in my backyard, I point them at this. So that's step 1 is what do we put in the plants. Step 2 is how do we protect them. So the big things that want to kill our plants, rodents, this is both rats and gophers. Deer will like to chew on plants. Bugs, there are so many different kinds of bugs. I won't even start on that. We could do a whole topic on bugs and how do you fight the different bugs. And then mold and mildew, which is primarily powdery mildew early on, and then just actual mold growing on your plants, which comes later in the season if we get lots of fog and sort of rainy, wet days in, say, September and October. For rodents and deer, this little lady here is amazing. We lost 1 plant our first year to a rat, and she keeps all our rats. She loves chasing rats. She'll sit and watch a wood pile for a half hour. She saw a rat go in there. We have 4 cats. We trained one of them to live in our woodshed, for example, by always feeding him in there. And so now he hangs out in the woodshed, keeps it free of rats. And then if you remember back to our in-ground picture, there was wire around the plant. When we dug that hole out, we lined it with gopher wire. And on the raised bed, you couldn't really see it, but we actually set those on top of a sheet of gopher wire. Gophers actually won't go up into those bags, interestingly enough, so you don't need that, but what they will do is they will run around and build tunnels under the bag and tear the bottom out of the bag, and then you can't use it again the next year. So what the wire does is keep them from stealing your entire bag bottom for bedding. But yes, between the dogs and the cats sort of keeping the rats at bay, and the gopher wire keeping the gophers at bay, because while she will merrily dig holes everywhere trying to catch a gopher, I don't know that she ever actually has, and mostly she just builds traps for people to step into. Because we certainly still have gophers everywhere. There are gopher holes all over our property, but they don't get into the plants because we keep them out with the wire. And so we use no rodenticide at all. Deer, I haven't seen a deer on my property because of the dogs, but the other thing you can do is if you use a little bit of blood meal, and as part of your fertilizing process, it's a little bit stinky. You will notice it for the first week, but the deer will stay the heck away. They do not like the smell of that. You don't want to use it too long because putting some blood meal in with the rest of your stuff we're doing will make your dogs dig in it because they think something wonderful is down there somewhere. And it will also attract raccoons and things like that. But as people actually will put blood meal in little bags and hang it up as a deer repellent. And it definitely works. So then we get to the smaller things, the bugs, and then the mold and the mildew. There's perfectly adequate products that are completely organic that will take care of these things if you are growing outdoors. Because in an outdoor environment, you've got all sorts of other factors going on that help keep things at bay. Indoors, if you try one of these things on your bugs, all it's going to do is trip them up for half a second and you're going to get it back. But outdoors, changing the pH using vinegar or actually baking soda to go the other direction will, depending on the bug, really screw them up and make them just not want to eat your plants. Soap and water is a traditional vegetable spray that works just fine in marijuana. Milk, interestingly enough, because of the sugars in it, encourage the growth of beneficial bacteria that will discourage powdery mildew, for example. Neem oil, this is a nice organic spray that comes mostly from India, actually, is where they use it. But we will generally spray twice a season, once fairly early on with soap and water is what I usually use. And then once sort of 2/3 of the way through the season is neem oil before things start flowering. And once stuff starts flowering, we generally do not spray for either of those. But early in the flowering, we will spray with a product called regalia, which is actually a giant knotweed extract. And this is not a traditional pesticide or a mold thing. What this does is this stimulates the plant's native immune system effectively. And so that it gets better at fighting off, specifically mold is what we mostly use it for, but it works for everything else too. It's just so what's, having run through all the products we use, what's the biggest thing we can do to help with the environment? Keep these out of the water. Pretty much water, everything that I listed is water soluble in some way or another, because I mean, fertilizers have to be water soluble because that's sort of how the plant gets them. And the pesticides and antifungal elements that we use, we put them in water to spray them. And so having them get flushed with water is how they get out into the environment. And so the sort of, the tricks that you need to play is controlling your water usage and then dealing with your soil so that it's not getting rained on and dealt with and then flushed out. And that actually costs you a lot of money. If you have to re-energize your soil every year because it sat out in the rain and all the nutrients got flushed out of it, you're wasting a lot of money. So we do hand watering of all our plants. Partly because since I am off-grid, the water pressure on my system is highly variable because we're running it through solar pumps. And so using a drip irrigation system would not work particularly well. But also, while it takes us about 3 hours to water the garden, we're not standing around for 3 hours doing nothing. We're spending that 3 hours individually inspecting every plant, trimming, taking care of it, looking for bugs, doing any little weeding that needs to be done around it and so on. So it's very much part of our daily care of the plants to, while we're watering it, take care of it. We also use a soil water sensor to actually check, so we're making sure we're not overwatering. We're very careful when we water to not create any runoff and so on. And then at the end of the season, when you're done, you've harvested, you need to protect your soil for the next year. So if it's in the raised beds, the bags, we actually empty them all out and we cover it with a tarp to protect it over the winter. Lots of bad actors that are growing will actually just buy new soil every year, which is incredibly expensive. I don't have that kind of money because I'm not growing on a huge industrial scale. But it's incredibly wasteful. I mean, that soil is going to wind up somewhere. It's going to wind up washed down into a creek or something, or just generally dumped off the side of the hillside or something. And no, you can totally reuse it, and it's actually much cheaper, although it takes a little bit more labor to mix the stuff in maybe than to just buy off the shelf stuff. But definitely, reuse your soil. And in terms of the county's proposed regulations, that's actually a regulation that I think should be in the county ordinance that didn't, is some way of encouraging growers to protect and recycle their stuff year to year like that. There's no mention that they've got pretty good protections for riparian setbacks. They've got lots of stuff in there about where you're getting your water from. For example, I get my water from a well, and I pump it with a solar pump. And if you do things right, you don't actually use that much water to grow a cannabis garden. They're pretty low water plants in terms of other agricultural products. But yeah, so keep your stuff out of the water. That's the lesson here. So that sums up the quick tour of how to grow your cannabis responsibly in terms of the environment.